thank you very much. I was telling them that here's where we'd be handing out box lunches, and we would all be climbing onto a tour bus right now to go look at these projects of shared stewardship on the ground. Our next presenters have invited us to their lunch table to hear a story. So this should be fun. Chelan County Commissioner Bob Boogert, Chelan PUD General Manager Steve Wright, whose son is also a totally awesome baseball player and on my son's team, used to be, and Melody Krimus, the Executive Director of the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. These three speakers at our lunch table were all present at ground zero for the inception of this project. This project has a story. We think it's worth telling, and we didn't want the story to disappear into the next presenter's own story. And perhaps you'll find fragments of your own story in this one. So take it away. I don't know how you want to do this.
Question. Melody, would you like to go first? Then
Sure.
Myself and then Steve, I think.
Does that work for you too? Kind of give a little
I can
history,
start
Steve?
wherever you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen. I just want to share a couple of images mainly. Can you see the PowerPoint? Yep. Great. Okay. So thanks, Andy, and all of the SAF folks for having us. I think I agree. It's a good story to tell, and I'm honored to be here with Steve Wright and Bob Boogert to share that history. So again, I'm the director of the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board, and we are the nonprofit organization whose responsibility it is to coordinate implementation of the recovery plan for the 3 salmonids that are on the Endangered Species Act list here. And we also facilitate the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. And sometimes people wonder, why is the Salmon Recovery Board mucking around in the forest? So I want to real quick tell you about that before I talk about the Upper Wenatchee pilot. So the region that the salmon here in this area where they spawn and rear is about a 10,000 square mile area. It basically runs from the base of Chief Joseph Dam, I think you all can see my pointer, here down to basically the Tri-Cities where the Yakima River flows into the Columbia. And just to zoom in a little, so this shows the 4 subbasins within which those salmon spawn and rear. So the Okanagan subbasin, and here's Chief Joseph Dam and the Okanagan River, then the Methow subbasin, that's Winthrop Twisp area. Then you'll see here is Lake Chelan, and then the Iniat subbasin with Iniat right there on the east, and then the Wenatchee subbasin. And in this 10,000 square mile area, about 70% of the land is managed by the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. So I like to share this side by side so you can see that. So here's Lake Chelan on the left and the same Lake Chelan on the right. And then up here following 97 is the Okanagan River. That's right here. So you can see how much of that landscape is managed by the Okawin. And the reason why that's so important for us is because we can't fully implement the recovery plan without dealing with some of those upland issues on the Forest Service land. And it's not just the 8,000 plus miles of roads, it's the condition of the forest. So what happens in those forests really impacts what happens in the streams, right? The condition of those trees and the canopy affects what's happening in the streams. And that's where our tributaries lie, the majority of our tributaries. It's where the snowpack resides the longest. It's where the cool, clean water comes from for our fish. So that's why we say in the Upper Columbia, fish grow on trees. So we're happy to convene our board. Bob Boogert is currently the chair of our board. We're happy to convene the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative when we were asked to do so in 2013 because of the strong connection between forests and fish. So we have a 24-member organization, very diverse. Talk about all hands, right? Conservation groups like Wilderness Society and Nature Conservancy, timber industry, all the timber industry that's left on this side of the mountains is part of the collaborative, local government, state, tribal, and federal agencies. And of course, the Okawin are key participants of that collaborative. And the main focus is to try to accelerate the pace and scale. I know we hear that a lot, but how can we help the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest accelerate the pace and scale of restoration? And so we launched in 2013, and then we had this horrendous 2014 wildfire season. This is a picture of the Chewacum fire. I mean, it was never more evident than that year, the connection between forests and streams. So this is the Wenatchee River, just up Tumwater Canyon, and the Chewacum fire in 2014. And that's about the time when the Wildfire in Summit happened. That was the next year. And Steve will probably get to some of this, where he sort of brought to the collaborative this opportunity to perhaps develop a pilot project that could, really get in front of this, these horrendous wildfire seasons and try to do the treatment that needed to be done on the Oka-Wen lands. So the collaborative quickly landed on this Upper Wenatchee landscape. And here's why. I mean, if you just look at this map, this just shows the fire perimeters in red just between 2012 and 2017. So just a 5-year period, this is the fire perimeters. And then right here in the middle of all of that are the Wenatchee, or the Upper Wenatchee pilot landscapes that were proposed. There's 4 watersheds. It's the Lake Wenatchee, the Big Meadow Creek, the Beaver Creek Wenatchee River, and the Upper Chihuahua watersheds. About a 75,000 acre landscape. It was perfect for a pilot because these are high priority areas for our salmon. They have a high level of WUI, wildland urban interface. You can see the white squares in there are the private land, and the green is of course the Forest Service land. It's high recreation area. Leavenworth is right there on the east there of the landscape. All those 1+ million tourists that come to Leavenworth don't just come for the sausages and beer. They go to recreate in that landscape, right? They go to Lake Wenatchee, they hike those trails, in the winter they cross country ski. So and then obviously it's a very high risk for a catastrophic wildfire. So this was the landscape and the message that we started to take around and educate people on. This was the map and this was the message, right? That we need, to do some treatment in this landscape, and soon. And so the collaborative members took that message to federal legislators. Here's a Lighthawk flight we took then Representative Reichert on, and there's Commissioner Gaynor, who's now a state rep, and Commissioner Doug England, who recently retired. We went to the regional forester, then Jim Pena. We went to the state forester, then Aaron Everett. We just took this message with the forest about the need for treating this area and how could we help the Forest Service get ahead of these wildfires. And we had a lot of fun doing it. Like I said, we took several Lighthawk flights with state, federal legislators and agency members. One year we couldn't get up because the smoke was so bad. We wanted to do a Lighthawk flight, so we took up snorkeling in the Upper Chihuahua, which is in this landscape. This is with some funders, just to see what that landscape, looks like underneath the water, and saw some juvenile Chinook. And everybody was interested in this pilot idea, everybody, because it was all hands, right? It was all those collaborative members that all shared the desire to accelerate treatment, all lands, right? It reflected that perfect private public partnership. It integrated aquatic and terrestrial restoration, and it was, geared towards increasing the planning area. 75,000 acres was a large planning footprint for the Oka-Wen at the time. And the idea was to increase the treatment per acre on that landscape and pace to get to that, to get it to a decision faster. So I think it's just a perfect example of just the power of shared stewardship. And we were able to secure, after a year or so of educating and communicating and messaging, a 1.6 million in supplemental hazardous fuel dollars from DC. So it's a powerful story. And I think that's it kind of for the background. I don't know if that helps set things up for Steve or Bob, if you want to talk from there. Or...
Yeah, I can take it from there. That's a great backgrounder. on Melody, as far as how this project got started here. But you missed one very important thing, though. I think the fact that the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board has just got a great reputation as far as being a neutral convener and facilitator for what can be very difficult discussions. And so that it's a natural fit for the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board to facilitate and kind of shepherd the process for the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. The collaborative itself, the concept of creating the Forest Health Collaborative started about in 2013. And at that time, it was just the two counties, Chelan County and Okanagan County, two tribes, the Colville Confederated Tribe and Yakima Nation, and three conservation groups in direct dialogue with the Okanagan Wenatchee National Forest about taking something like this on. And there was really a strong consensus that we needed a collaborative and proactive effort at the local level to address forest health. And this was based upon a lot of our observations of tuppish down in the Yakima, Kittitas County area, and the Northeast Washington Forest Health Collaborative with Colville National Forest. It was very evident that they were getting a lot done. And so now, as Melody said, the collaborative then expanded and grew, and it is now comprised of over 20 fully committed partners that represents a broad range of interests there. But really what I want to stress, though, it's the role of the community at large that's been really important in this process. To many people, the forest health issue was kind of an esoteric issue to be handled by government, kind of like how climate change responses was often considered. But then there was a recognition that there are actions that all community members can take and actively participate. And a lot of that was precipitated by the really catastrophic wildfires in 2014 and 2015 that really heightened that dynamic and the dialogue within the community. That we as a community needed to be more proactive about wildfires. And a lot of this was through the excellent efforts of Paul Hesberg and North 40 Video Productions in the production of the era of megafires that gave our communities a deeper understanding of how our forests have lost its resilience. And then more importantly, it showed us that we as a community can be more proactive about correcting this process. And this, as Melody mentioned, this messaging was tied in with some really thoughtful community dialogue initiated through the Wildfire and Us program, sponsored by the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. And we had meetings with over 500 members in attendance of those. It really became a much more engaged community that really gave us the political ability to really initiate a lot of these efforts. And it also brought in a lot of community leaders that were not previously affiliated with forest health and wildfires, but they now had a clear interest. There was heightened community awareness about what was the role of citizens in this process. And it's not just, the local firewise efforts of local landowners, but interest in the broad landscape level actions needed with our national forests. And so the collaborative recognized that there was a need for a high profile, high visibility landscape level treatment near significant communities like Lake Wenatchee and Plain that showcase how we can get a forest to be more resilient and frankly, to create jobs in the process. And the Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project meets that needs. So we had community leaders like my good friend, Chelan PUD District Manager Steve Wright, who stepped forward as they were concerned about the declining health of our forests and the increased risk of wildfire. And they came to assist the collaborative at the right time. So it was that message that he and many other community leaders reached out to our congressional delegation on the need to initiate this effort. And so we're thankful to Steve and others for their efforts here. And we're thankful to Senators Murray and Cantwell, who are very responsive to that need. And as Melody said, that they invested about $1.6 million into the Okanagan Wenatchee National Forest for the initiation of this Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project. And really the role of Chelan County in this is increasingly important to us. As you know, Chelan County is about 80% public land, and it's primarily Okanagan National Forest. So our local government is increasingly vested in the success of shared stewardship in forest health, as it's the foundation of our rural economies. Was in the past, it's now in the present, and it will be in the future. So the success of the Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project will, in our minds, set us on a trajectory that can benefit all our rural communities, all the way up and down the east slope of the Cascades. So, just looking at just the Wenatchee Valley in particular, it's our legacy is tied up in the timber economies at that local scale. There were mills in Winton, mills in Leavenworth, Shaston, and Cashmere, which obviously was a major component of our rural economy with well-paying family jobs. And increasingly, we're seeing that the recreation-based economy is growing in our county as well. And that is putting increasing pressure on Okanagan National Forest at an unprecedented rate. So Chelan County, we really want to showcase the Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project as a model for creating healthy forest land communities for working lands, sustainable harvest, a strong recreation-based economy, salmon recovery, invasive species management, and the emerging climate change resilience programs that we will be needing. So this invariably takes a strong commitment to shared stewardship with an emphasis on working together with our tribal, state, and federal partners, and a linkage then to the private forests and the development of adjacent community forests. It also requires active management and support of our local communities, which is crucially important. So we think that the work of the Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project will pave the way for other shared stewardship projects all along the east slope of the Cascades. And there are projects that the Forest Health Collaborative now are looking at and are carrying out, I should say, in Mission, Mount Hall, and Twisp up in the Okanagan County, and the upcoming Chumstick to Lower Shaston project in Chelan County. So we think that this is a casebook example of shared stewardship and landscape scale restoration. And so Chelan County is highly committed to that concept. And so if I could pass it over then to Steve Wright, and I'm going to pass this over to him with the hopes that someday I'll be able to share in a pint of brew with Steve at his newfound pint of glass that he's got there.
Well, thank you, Bob. And it's an honor to be virtually on the stage with Bob and Melody, who have done the hard work here. I'm certain that I know the least about forest health and wildfire risk of anyone participating in this meeting here today. I do want to tell you a little bit about the journey that I've been on, though. I moved to Chelan County in 2013, and in 2014, I was very much surprised by the smoke in the valley. It's a beautiful place to live. It's really fantastic, but I was concerned about what it would mean in terms of living here for the long term if you had that kind of smoke in the valley all the time, and decided to get involved at the behest of a friend of mine in this wildfire summit concept. It's just what can I do to try to contribute to this community? That was fantastic because I got the opportunity to learn about some really important stuff, and I feel like I sat at the knee of Paul Hesburgh for about a year, learning about forest health. I didn't know anything about forest health before that, and I took away a couple of things from that. I kind of thought, well, we just need to do something and then get this cleaned up in a year or two. Well, the magnitude of the problem became really clear to me from learning from Paul, and I realized that this was going to take a big effort by a lot of parties for a number of years to try to be successful at. Really, to be honest, I wasn't really sure how I was going to use this information that I got because it didn't seem to fit in my day-to-day utility job, at least at that point, although it became clear over the course of the next couple of years that it was something that's extremely important to the utility industry. I was happy to be able to Melody, I think I've overstated it, was him to the Wildfire Summit and had dinner with him around that. And it was somebody else's idea, honestly. Rufus Woods, the publisher of the Wenatchee World, had suggested that we pursue a pilot project, and I just passed along that idea to Peter, and he ran with it and got things going from there. So 2015, we had the Sleepy Hollow fires here in Wenatchee, lost more than 25 homes. That was a really devastating thing to see happen. And then later we had the fires up in Chelan, where we lost a lot of homes. And that caused us to think differently about fire at the PUD. It became clear that we had risk to our assets from wildfire that could be substantial. The FEMA dollars come in and they help, but for a period of time, you have substantially degraded reliability, and we care a lot about reliability. That's what we do in our business, is try to make sure that we keep the lights on. So we made it a part of our 2015-2019 strategic plan to address wildfire risk. And we've done a lot since then. We call it painting and grubbing. If you see transmission or distribution lines out there, you'll notice that there's paint about halfway up the pole, and that's fire retardant paint. And grubbing is basically just getting all the weeds that are likely to go up in flames away. A lot more work on vegetation management, a lot more cleaning away of the trees and branches that can create fire risk. And we've even gone so far as we've got a $5 million project to replace wood poles with metal poles up in Chelan, because there's not a whole lot we can do to protect that other than to try to reduce the chance of the poles catching on fire. So we felt like we were doing pretty good. We making some real progress. And then we watched the fires starting in 2017 in California. And that was the first time really that we in the utility industry were hearing about the risk of ignition of fires starting with transmission and distribution systems. And those were massive fires, you may recall. In 2017, they happened. In 2018, they happened again. 2019 was the most devastating. I think most people will recall the Camp Fire. 85 people lost their lives in the Camp Fire. And at the end of the day, the combination of that fire plus the others that had occurred in the earlier years led to the bankruptcy of the largest electric utility in the country, Pacific Gas and Electric. Now, I've got to tell you, when you're a consumer-owned utility in Washington State and you're hearing from folks that fire risk is greatest in Chelan County, and you're watching these events go on in other parts of the country that don't seem that far away, it definitely gets your attention because we are here to promote public health and safety for people. And so the idea that our system might be leading to an ignition of a fuel-loaded system out there, and that might have those kinds of devastating consequences, it gives one a great deal of pause. And then last year, in 2020, we not only saw massive fires in California, we also saw them in Oregon for the first time. And in fact, there's some evidence that the fire in the Santiam Canyon was ignited from a transmission or distribution line. And so now the fires are starting to get closer too. And of course, we've had challenges with big wildfires here in Washington. We don't have the clear distinction of being able to define that a wildfire started from a transmission and distribution system, but we know that the system, the forest out there is fuel loaded, and so the risk is there. We don't operate our transmission and distribution systems differently than we have in the past. Transmission and distribution systems have always had the capability to create sparks. So in the past, we just didn't have a fuel-loaded system underneath the transmission and distribution system that would create. Thinking about this not only with respect to protecting our assets, but the fact that we need to okay, sorry about that. Not really sure what happened there. Can you hear me okay, Melody? Yes, great, okay. So I'll just pick up where I left off. So I was saying that, we don't really operate our system differently, but clearly there are things happening out there where the fuel load in the forest is causing a much different reaction from the way our systems now do operate. So we are actually to the point of doing something that for those of us in the utility industry is, I would say, heretical. I've spent my whole career, so has most everybody in the utility industry, trying to improve reliability for customers. We are now actively investigating the idea of putting in place a fire safety outage management program, which is under certain conditions, high fire risk, high wind conditions.
Steve, it's breaking up again.
Shut off the power in advance.
Hey, Steve, it's kind of breaking up again. You might try just
Yeah, maybe we ought to go off of our video.
Yeah, Steve, just try turning off your video. Maybe it's just too much through the, I don't know. You would.
Connie or Andy, if you would like us to go on to questions right now, and then perhaps Steve will be able to rejoin. But Steve said he was essentially done with his discussion.
And when he gets back in, maybe he can tell us that last piece they were talking about instituting. And Bob, I think you can turn your camera on. I think it must be, it was Steve's connection with both his video and. So does that sound good if we kind of open it up for questions while we're waiting for Steve to dial back in?
Yeah, we're essentially to the end of our session, and at 1 p.m., which is in about 30 seconds, we start the next topic anyways. So and I don't even think we can, we don't have any questions in the chat. So if anybody wants to speak up and ask a question, I guess we can take one. Otherwise, I'll pass the mic to Connie and we can move into the next session.